Hello, 3111. This is Dr. Biker here again, and I wanted to explain a little bit about the direct instruction lesson plan assignment. You will have more details about this assignment and more explanation for it in the module 2. However, I think it's good to just kind of walk through the assignment and look at it together. So that's what we're doing here. I want to first just share where you will find the assignment. You'll be reading more about this assignment in module 1, and then you'll actually complete this assignment during module 2. It's not due until 11:59 p.m. Monday, July 19. However, please feel free to finish it early. All right. So a little bit about direct instruction. Direct instruction is a type of pedagogy that's very teacher directed. But despite what maybe you think in terms of teacher directed means lectures or very boring kind of presentations, that's not what we mean by direct instruction. Direct instruction just is a way for thinking about whose role, or the teacher's role, I should say, in the lesson. So it kind of follows this I do, we do, you do kind of method for teaching. That includes this gradual release of responsibility. The teacher aligns the lesson with standards and objectives, strongly written objective statements with strong action verbs. And that objective will provide the assessment for the lesson. And then in the I do section, the teacher provides guided and explicit instructions for what the students will be doing. And then, as I mentioned, direct instruction includes this gradual release of responsibility. So direct instruction lessons are very common in literacy, especially starting off a unit. And it can be very common in social studies as well. But you can see direct instruction in science and math as well as all other subject areas. So the purpose of this assignment is to have you create a direct instruction lesson plan, and you'll be creating this lesson plan with this direct instruction lesson plan template. So you'll just click on that lesson plan template. Now, just like the morning meeting, I want you to actually create a copy of this template. It's really easy to do that. So you click on File, the File tab, then make a copy, and it will now create a new copy or a copy document. When you push OK, then come up here and rename your copy. You can include the direct instruction lesson plan still, but just put your first and last name. So we'll just say Star Student. But include your first and last name in the file name up there. Then you will be following the template instructions, or following the instructions up here and completing this template. So now what I want to do is talk through an example that I posted for you to be able to share what these different features are. Now, of course, the top part is pretty basic information: your name, the subject area, your grade level. For this assignment, you're going to choose either a literacy standard or language arts standard, or a social studies standard. And you can see there is a link to the standards document for North Carolina right here in the template itself. So you could just click on that link. I did include, if you're lost and you're just not sure which standards, I did include some example standards that are language arts based. If you want to use one of these, those are in the assignment, the actual description on Canvas. But if you already know, hey, I'd really like to teach a social studies lesson and this is the grade level, then you need to dig into that standards document or the standards website and find a standard that you can use for this lesson. Okay, so that's the first part. And then the next component is very important. That's the daily lesson objective. Now, we're going to be talking more about this, or I'll be talking more about lesson objectives and how to write them in Module 2. But this is going to provide a quick nutshell summary of what I mean by daily lesson objective. So I want you to get in the habit of writing strong lesson objectives that have performance criteria, conditions, and then the criteria for what you want the students to be able to do. And I know this seems at first like, oh, that's a lot, Biker, you're asking me to do. But I think you're going to find it pretty straightforward. And most likely you have some experience or you've seen teachers do this kind of thing already. So let's take a look at what do I mean by the daily lesson objective. So an objective often comes from the standard itself, okay? So for example, here's a literacy standard, a reading standard in 2nd grade that says ask and answer such questions as who, what, where, when, why, and how to demonstrate an understanding of key details in a text. You can look at that standard and say, okay, well, I already kind of get a sense for what the students should be able to do. And the performance that you want them to do is ask and answer questions from a text. And I put an example text in here. And then the conditions means how the students will be able to do that. Sort of what are the conditions you are providing for students to be able to do that. And in this lesson, the students will read and record their questions and answers on a graphic organizer. Graphic organizer simply would have those who, what, when, where, why type of questions that students would just be filling out. The criteria is the expectation for mastery, right? To be able to know that they have been able to do this, you will be looking as the teacher to see if they were able to, for example, score 5 out of the 6 questions asked on their graphic organizer. So objectives are made up of these 3 components, right? The performance, the conditions, and then the criteria. And you can see then the whole objective statement reads like this. The students ask and answer questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how, about a text independently. To be proficient, students will be able to accurately ask and answer questions using 5 out of 6 keywords. So that's what I'm looking for. Now I want you to really pay attention to how the verbs in this objective statement. When you're writing your objective statements, you want to use strong action verbs. Why? Strong action verbs are measurable. They give us what we can be, as teachers, what we can be able to see and assess. So examples of strong action verbs are analyze, explain, describe, compare. These are strong action verbs. I have provided in Module 2 a whole list, it looks like this, of action verbs that you can use when writing objective statements that are connected to the Bloom's taxonomy, all right? And I want you to just go ahead and look at this list. These are all really strong. Again, it'll be in Module 2, and choose a strong action verb. Now, this is really important. You want to write this down. There are some verbs, I won't call them action, they're weak and generic verbs. And you want to avoid those verbs when you write your objective statements. So avoid the following verbs like a plague. Never use these verbs when you're writing objective statements. Don't use the verb understand. Don't use the verb know, to know, or to comprehend. Why? Why are these verbs weak, generic? You don't want to use them. Simply put, they're weak and generic verbs because you're not able to measure those verbs. You're not able to assess it. You literally can't go in and open inside a child's brain to see if they were able to understand something. Okay? Um, so action verbs for objectives statements should be something you should be able to see a child do. You can see them analyze a text. They could do that on like a graphic organizer. You can see a child or a learner explain something to you. All right, so use the strong action verbs. And again, you're going to hear me repeat this a lot, and you probably have heard it in other courses as well. Strong action verbs. And pick one from this list that's in module 2. Another great one is identify, recognize, create. All right. So that piece on your direct instruction lesson plan is the daily lesson objective. You'll also highlight the 21st century skills in this lesson. So when we think of 21st century skills, I want you to think of 5 different skills. One is collaborate. Do the students collaborate or work together in this lesson? Communication is another important 21st century skill. Creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. Those are the 5 what we identify as 21st century skills. And the reason they got named or identified as 21st century skills is that academics, teachers, educators have said these are important skills that students are always developing that help them to be able to integrate quickly for careers in the 21st century, often careers that are based on technology and working together, building social skills, that sort of thing. The other feature in this direct instruction lesson plan is a box about cultural responsiveness. Now, I'll have more information about cultural responsiveness in the upcoming modules, but it's really important to be thinking about ways to connect to the diversity in your classroom. One of the strongest ways to do that is to include text, diverse text that students actually see themselves in the illustrations, or they see a diverse array of characters, settings, etc., that they can actually see themselves in the text. All right. So in this box, I want you to explain in 1 or 2 sentences how the lesson connects to the culture. How is it culturally responsive to the kids in your classroom, to the diversity in your classroom? The other features now in the direct instruction lesson plan are just how do you organize it? So the focus and review part is really how do you hook the students, get them interested into the lesson. The statement or objective for the student is putting the objective statement in kid-friendly language. The teacher input part is what you do as the teacher to help support and prepare your students for the lesson. All right, so this could be one of the best ways to do the teacher input is to actually have like an anchor chart where you explain the lesson vocabulary and have students talk about what are some of the key vocabulary words that they're going to need to know in the lesson. Then the guided practice is actually something we do together, right? That you do with the kids that you're watching to make sure that they understand what is the objective, what are they going to be doing to, again, further support. And then the 5th part on this lesson plan is independent practice. So independent practice is where the students now go and work on this on their own. So they've already been supported with you with using an anchor chart and maybe showing an example. They get a chance to work together, and then the independent practice. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, Biker, this is a lot. This is a big lesson, and you're right. Direct instruction lessons, especially if you're teaching younger elementary kids, they might not be just a 1-day lesson. It could be several days, and that's okay. So I want you to think there's a section in here where you give time estimates. And because you all are teaching assistants, you already have a sense for how long would these kind of activities take, right? What's the realistic amount of time? So do put in the time estimates, and I'll show you that in my example in just a second. There's another feature of this lesson plan called the assessment methods. Now, the assessment, you will often get your assessment from your criteria or the condition and criteria that you have in your daily lesson objective. So that's one of the great parts about writing strong objectives, is that it actually gives you the assessment. And I'll show you an example in just a second of that. And then the final piece before where you just list the materials is the closure. And closure is really important. We often miss this as educators, but it's really important that there is a way that students can reflect on what they learn, and that you can get another piece of evidence to see that they mastered it. So one of the things I'll encourage you to do as part of the closure is not just have a time where you say, hey, let's talk about what you learned, but to actually have students write this down, or if they're younger elementary kids, they might draw a picture for you using an exit ticket. And you'll notice in my lesson plan here that I'll show you, I have an anchor chart at the beginning and an exit ticket at the end. I think those anchor charts and exit tickets are great ways to support students. So for the closure, you want a way, again, that students can reflect on what they learned, and an exit ticket provides a good way to do that. So let's look at my example that I have, and this, you'll find this example linked in the assignment description on Canvas as well. So I have a social studies lesson. It has a 3rd grade standard, and the standard says analyze how events, individuals, and ideas have influenced the history of local and regional communities. Okay, so my performance objective off of this standard is students will be able to analyze historical events. And my condition that I want them to be able to do is create a timeline that represents the history and key dates within North Carolina. And the criteria that I've selected is that students must have 4 of the 5 historical events on their timeline. It needs to be in the correct order and explaining what happened on that day or time, that date. So you can see then the whole objective together. I just push all these together. Students will be able to analyze historical events. Listen here, notice that analyze, it's a really strong verb. I think it's actually one of the best verbs to use when writing objectives. So again, use those strong action verbs. Back to the whole objective statement. Students will be able to analyze historical events and create a timeline to represent history and key dates within North Carolina. Students must have 4 of the 5 historical events on their timeline in the correct order and chronology to show their understanding. So that's what I'm asking the students to be able to do and show me as part of this lesson. I've highlighted the different 21st century skills. So in this lesson, they'll be demonstrating communication through the timelines they create, the creativity, and also critical thinking. Then in terms of cultural responsiveness, it's culturally responsive, and that I included activities and texts that connect to Black history. And also students can research and include historical events in North Carolina that are connected to the diverse people groups and the stories here in North Carolina. All right, so just walking through this rather quickly, you can study this example on your own, but I hope you do use it as a guide to help you and a model to help you. So the focus and review, I start this lesson by just reading aloud The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which is a favorite book of a lot of kids. So there's already going to be an interest. It's a short book. I might even just show the YouTube video of it, which I think is about 3 minutes long. But then I'll ask the kids, hey, so what are 4 events that happened in the caterpillar's life? If you think of a timeline in the caterpillar's life, how can you use, or what can you use to keep track of these events? And then we're building this, we're using the Very Hungry Caterpillar to describe what are ways you could use timeline even of that book. Okay, so it's to really help students understand the use of a timeline in a very, very popular book that they might enjoy. All right, it won't take too long, about 5 to 10 minutes is my estimate. Then in this second part, you see I have put the objective in a kid-friendly way. You will be able to analyze historical events and create a timeline. This should be not virtual, but just create a timeline to represent history within North Carolina. Maybe it's not the, maybe it might be still a little bit too adult friendly, but anyway, put it in a way that for kids, but use your strong action verbs still. Then in the teacher input part, you see I've included an anchor chart. And as a teacher, what I would do is set the students up for success in this lesson by first explaining some of the vocabulary of the lesson. I do this in the classroom carpet. So when I taught for about a decade in Washington, D.C., taught elementary school kids. And usually in the I do part, I always would do this section on the classroom carpet. So it was a nice gathering spot. We could talk and get the kids set up for success for the lesson. So this would take about 10 to 15 minutes again, where I explain the different vocabulary words that they're going to encounter and talk, have students even put these vocabulary words in their own terms. Like this is where I would say, hey, I need 2 volunteers who explain these vocabulary words using their own words or putting in their own words. And then I would also include, I'd show them a personal history timeline, like 5 events in my life that had been the most important events, to show that history is not only something connected to a state or to an individual, but it's also personal. That's where we learn about history, when we can connect it to our own personal lives. All right, so that would be the I do part. I want you to notice one thing in my description. I'm not asking you to give me every single word you're going to say. You don't have to script this out. Give me enough details in each of these parts that if I was a substitute teacher, I could understand what this is about. So I'm not asking for any kind of scripting out a lesson, but do give me, again, enough details that I can understand. I could walk in and teach this lesson. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so in the guided practice, it's an activity with putting events from the life of Harriet Tubman. I would be using this worksheet for students to put events from the life of Harriet Tubman in order. And they would do this in groups of 3 to 4. It'd probably take about 10, 15 minutes again, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how well the groups work together. And they're cutting these out and then pasting them into the timeline. Now, if I was doing this with my class, with a group of 3rd graders, I would have already this stuff cut out, these little cards, so that they're basically, it's not important that they know how to cut these. That's going to be take a lot of time, be a waste of time. So I'd already have these cut out in advance. So basically they're just analyzing, reading the cards, and then making choices about what happened first, what happened next, because that's the most important part of this. A part of this piece of the lesson plan. All right, and then the independent practice, this is the you do, right? This is what the kids will be doing independently. And I put a little note here that this could take longer than 1 day. This is probably a full week, almost a full week lesson, which is just fine. So I just said this would be about 30 minutes a day over 3 days. In this part, they're doing some research about 5 historical events of North Carolina history. Now, I've included the events down here, the dates, and they're going to use another little template to create their own timeline of North Carolina. They can add additional dates if they want, but they need to include these 5 dates. They need to be in order. And then in their template, they're going to write a short description about each event or date, and then draw something in the box to represent the date and time. So that's the independent part. Again, it would definitely take more than 1 day to do this. It would probably be a 2 or 3 days kind of thing if you're doing it in class. You can see my assessment here. It's an observation. I'll be observing the class, doing sort of informal observation. And then the summative assessment is actually their creation of the timeline itself, that they have the 4 out of 5 historical events on their timeline in order, and they also have an explanation for each of those events. Then my closure, again, remember that I talked about the exit ticket. For the closure to this lesson, I'd actually have the students, this would be another day where they present their timelines to one another, probably in some sort of grouping. I said that if I had a spare bulletin board, I'd love for them to post their timelines on that bulletin board. That's one other thing I would say, encourage you. Bulletin boards, the best bulletin boards are the ones with student work on it. So I know a lot of teachers spend a lot of time designing these really cute looking sort of Pinterest bulletin boards. But if you want kids to pay attention to what's on the bulletin board, put their work on it. And it actually makes it very easy for you to just pop in their work and not have to spend a lot of your teaching time thinking about bulletin boards, okay? I know some teachers really love doing that, but I think what I've noticed in my teaching career, the best ones are always the ones with the kids' work on it. All right, so on your exit ticket, the exit ticket that students would create is they need to be able to define the word chronology in their own words, because this is one of the words in the anchor chart, if you remember, and then define what timeline means. And then I had a couple other things I wanted them to do. One way that the people can use timelines, and then just a favorite event from what they did in the independent practice. So that's what the direct instruction lesson plan looks like. Again, in module 2, there'll be some more information about these sections, but I wanted to give you a quick overview of what this assignment entails. And I look forward to reading your direct instruction lesson plans. I do have some tips in here in the assignment description, as well as a rubric. I look forward to reading them on Monday, July 19, or if not sooner than that. Thank you all.